Our next session it's a continuum from yesterday's session where we talked about lessons learned in the trenches. And we said how it's really helpful for us as professionals to learn from other people's experience, to apply that to our own organizations and grow from that. So with that in mind, one of the talks earlier spoke about the, I can't remember which speaker it was, I have to apologize, but spoke about how 80% of, I think it was Joe, 80% of the critical infrastructure in the US is privately owned. And with cyber attacks, now they're exposed to state actors. And I think anyone who holds a critical infrastructure understands why they are subject to state-level attacks. A little bit different from that are private companies that are not critical infrastructure, let's say movie companies. Why would anyone who's the CISO of a movie company ever have to deal with a state actor is a question that I think still puzzles all of us. So to answer that question, I would like to invite again on stage my good friend. I never learn. I just never learn. It's amazing, right? Pavlov was wrong. Okay, so I am going to invite on stage my good friend Keren Elazari, an analyst, author, and researcher from here, the Blavatnik ICRC. Please help me welcoming Keren on stage. Stay away.
Forgot I don't have a headset anymore. Thank you, Matan.
Of course.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you today again. I was here yesterday. My name is Keren Elazari. I'm a senior researcher here at Tel Aviv University and at the center. In fact, this is our 9th year running Cyber Week, and I've been a part of it for a few years, and it never ceases to amaze me, the beautiful audience that comes here to my hometown of Tel Aviv from all corners of the world. So what I'd like to tell you today, what we have in this session is about surviving a nation-state cyber attack. In the 19th century, Prussian strategist Karl von Clausewitz famously said that we could look at war simply as the continuation of policy and politics in other means. I would like to suggest that in this day and time, we can actually look at cyber war as the continuation of policy and politics in other means. In fact, it seems that is more accurate than ever before. If you consider the events of the past few weeks and the past few years, I believe that in the 21st century, when they write the history books on when the age of cyber warfare began, they will look at this decade, and it will certainly be cyber warfare as a means for policy, politics, and for organizations and countries to affect their wishes in the world. Now, to discuss how that actually happened for one very particular company about 5 years ago, when a very certain nation state decided they were not happy about things and the way that company was making their decisions, I'd like to invite our next guest to join us. This guest is somebody I personally invited to Tel Aviv for Cyber Week. His name is Stevan Bernard, and he is the former executive vice president for global protection services at Sony Pictures. So you can guess which company we're going to talk about soon. I met Stevan just a few months ago when we discussed some of the lessons and the things we can learn 5 years after that devastating Sony Pictures cyber attack that happened in November 2014. Please join me in welcoming to the stage for a fascinating fireside chat, my friend, Stevan Bernard. Thank you. Do you want to do it standing up or sitting down? I like standing up. Is that okay?
Don't get too close to the microphone.
Okay. Everybody can hear us well like this? Very good. All right, Steve. So what do you think about my premise for our session today? Do you think that every organization, not just every country, but every organization, including corporates, should consider themselves as combatants on the cyber warfare playing field? What do you think?
I actually do. It's the price of being connected. And I'll just tell you a real quick story. On day 2 of our attack, which was in November of 2014,
November 2014.
Someone very senior in the US government had a conversation with me. And they said, you need to think about this differently. It's a cyber attack, but you need to use battlefield tactics if you're going to survive it. So think about war. And the DPRK, 4 months before.
The DPRK is the Democratic Republic of?
The People's Republic of China, of Korea, not China.
Yes. Just to,
Get that straight.
The Democratic Republic,
yes,
they
thank you.
say. Yes.
They wrote a letter to the UN and they wrote a letter to the President of the United States, and they said that they would consider the release of a movie to be an act of war if Sony Pictures did this. That movie was ultimately released after the attack. The focus during the attack was to survive it, and we'll talk more about that.
Okay. Well, Steve, you were really there in the thick of it. Can you tell us briefly what was your role and position, November 2014, and what happened, you know, the day it happened? Was it November 14, 2014? A very special date.
24th.
Okay. So what happened there? Tell us. And what was your job with Sony, and what was your role?
My job at Sony, I had a converged model there. So the CISO and his team worldwide reported to me, as did many other functions, including investigations, forensics, and business continuity planning, and all of that. And I'm really thankful that we had what we had when this happened, because we sat down that day with the people that were still available, because it was Thanksgiving week. A lot of executives are gone, meaning a lot of decision makers are gone. But we were able to figure out what we were going to do, because we had already defined roles and responsibilities. We didn't sit in that room that day and get bloody knuckles because we were fighting with each other. And if you can't get to that point before it happens, you have an issue. So
have you had a chance to do like simulations, role-playing games, exercises, preparing for something like what happened that year? Because it was quite a, you know, it was quite a blindside sort of attack. It was quite a surprising attack. Were you prepared for something like that to happen?
Never underestimate your enemy. I would say that North Korea is much better at this than you might imagine. And by the way, they were in it for about, I think the average time that from the time of intrusion to the time of discovery is about 170 days now.
170 days.
That's a very long time. And they were able to do some things that really caused us a problem later on with the release of data.
So not just movies, right? Movies were leaked, emails. We discovered that...
Top 12 executives, 12 years of email with attachments, ended up being posted on Pastebin site, which means you can't do anything with it. You can't make attribution to who posted it. It's there. So what we had to do, actually I should back up, because let me talk about day one. That morning, the decisions that we made that day, I believe, saved the company. And what you need to understand about the intent was to destroy the business, to blemish the brand, to not have the film released, and maybe more than that, but I'm not going to speculate. Decisions day one. This is big. This is global. We have no authority. What are we going to do? Who are we going to call? And we did something that up until that point, a lot of companies would not do, a lot of general counsels would not allow. We called the FBI. We also called a really premier computer cyber forensics company to come in and help us, and we called a whole bunch of other people to come in and help us. So we brought in the Army. You can always send the Army home, but you don't want to be wishing you would have called them in. So the decision to bring the Bureau in and kind of waive legal privilege and work together was absolutely the right one, because it was global. So a lot of laptops and computers that had been compromised years ago were used as a part of the attack. And
may I ask you about that? So Sony Pictures obviously is a global organization. You are based in Los Angeles yourself, in California. You were at the time when you were working with them. The company does have ties to Japan and Sony Japan as well. So there's also that geopolitical context of Japan and North Korea and that complexity. What I'm also curious to know is that you had all of these devices all over the world. When the proverbial it hit the fan, shall we say, when you had all of these devices, you basically had to deal not just with the data theft and the exfiltration of information, but also with the fact that the virus the attackers unleashed happened to be a wiper virus.
That's right.
And back at that time, if you remember from last year and 2 years ago, the NotPetya virus, that's also a very powerful wiper virus. Wiper viruses don't steal information, they destroy your hard drives. They're not like ransomware when they encrypt the data and then you can receive access back, but they completely destroy it. So the goal is not stealing information or extracting ransom, it was actually data destruction. When did you discover that fact, and how did you deal with all of those computers going blank?
This was a variant of the Shamoon virus, which was a variant of Stuxnet. Thank you. And
I had nothing to do with it.
It is a wiper, and the intent that day was to do that. So we operated in 50 countries, 150 locations, thousands of people all over the world doing productions and so on. When you turned your system on, it was like ransomware. There was the Red Devil, the Guardians of Peace, and they owned your system. And by the way, it began the meltdown of every hard drive when it was connected, when it was on.
You mean a physical meltdown? The drives would overheat, or, okay.
The data was gone.
The data was gone.
Yeah. So when we realized that was what was happening, we had a really, really difficult decision to make. And I would encourage you in your planning to really think about this. What are you going to do? You're going to sit there and watch it happen, or are you going to do something about it? What are you going to do about it? What we did, we made a decision to unplug ourselves, hardwire, worldwide, from everyone.
A difficult decision to make in such a moment.
Unbelievable decision. But you know what it did? It froze the malware, which is also evidence. And when we brought the Bureau in and others, we were able to prove, so December 19th, President of the United States, Director Comey, made attribution to North Korea. They did it not in a vacuum. They did it because they had the evidence.
So the technical attribution based on the actual malware that was discovered within the devices.
Absolutely.
So I want to touch on that and the technical aspect as well. You know, you mentioned this. What are you going to do? Who are you going to call? You can't call the Ghostbusters. In your case...
That was our movie, by the way.
Yeah, I know. And you have made a decision to bring in law enforcement, FBI, and certainly a very prominent American company that specializes in forensics. But what a lot of companies, even today, don't have is an existing relationship with an incident response or forensics provider. And you want to have that before something happens. Yep. You don't want to look up the number for the Ghostbusters in the yellow pages and looking for a Yelp recommendation about who is the best forensic company to work with when you're already in the midst of an incident. So did you have something like that in place, or was that something you learned on the go and you had to figure it out?
The relationship that we had with the FBI was a lasting one. It was one of trust. And when I made the phone call to the assistant director in Los Angeles that day, how many people do you need? They sent 6 cyber guys over, day one, and we partnered with them for months doing this investigation. And I would encourage you, if you have an interest, 4 months ago, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the U.S. took the affidavit that really lays out exactly what happened. It's 185 pages. It is fascinating.
I think I read it in a Saturday, you know, a couple of months ago. But that's actually, it is fascinating. And you learn more about this attack group. What was their code name? Remind me again. Is it the Lazarus Group? And that was, the Lazarus Group is how the American government and many other security companies have code-named the North Korean cyber attack teams. And from reading that document, you can see that just the incredible amount of detail and preparation, the false identities that they operate under, the different type of technical toolkits that they have. I agree with you, Steven. We should never underestimate those enemies. Although people might think, you know, it's a country that's not connected to the internet, so-called, they have a lot of capabilities in place.
They do. And by the way, the speculation was, oh, it had to be an insider.
Yeah, there was a whole story out about a disgruntled ex-employee.
Yep.
And did that have any shred of truth to it, or was that just a story?
No, and I'll tell you why. They didn't need an insider.
Because they were inside.
One of the weak links is all of us. It's the human link, right? It's the naivety. And I hate to say it, but email with links, spear phishing, works very well today. Yeah. 85% of all attacks still have the root right there.
Yeah. So specifically spear phishing is a very popular attack vector, and it's still used today. Actually, this is something I also talked about yesterday in our session. We don't really have fierce cyber warriors standing on the frontiers. We are it. It's each and every one of us, because we're the ones who are making hundreds of security decisions every day. When we click on a link, when we download an app, when we introduce a new device into the network. Speaking about devices, I want to briefly move on to a quick question. How did you really, what was the resilience that you had to have in place to recover or to work with no technology? People were working with pen and paper, faxes. What was going on in this global company? How many people, again, were working?
About 12,000 employees.
12,000 employees with no access to digital infrastructure.
All over the world. And by the way, one thing I would really encourage is there are a lot of really good mass communication tools out there. You need to have an alternative means to be able to communicate with your people that is reasonably valid.
So people went on to using their personal mobile phones and
chat messages. Everything had to happen. And the BlackBerry phones that we were getting rid of, we pulled them out and started using them again.
Oh, really?
We did. We did a lot of things like that.
So it's back to basics when something like that
happens. The other
happened.
thing you have to remember if you go dark is how are you going to run your business? So you need to deal with the issue, obviously, but you also have a business to run. You have bills to pay. You have receivables. You have, and by the way, I heard General Ben Israel talk Monday, and he made a comment. He said, prevention and technology is really, really important, but don't discount how important the people are. By the way, that day, and for many days after, the people were the victims. And you need to realize that and think about that. I had people that moved cots in their offices and worked 20 hours a day for a long period of time. This was a monster that we had to overcome. We had to make payroll, and we never missed payroll.
That's incredible. And now we're almost at the end of our time, but I really want to ask you this question I've been curious about. It's been almost 5 years since that attack, which really redefined, I believe, the way most corporates look at how cyber attacks, impact them. It really shaked up everyone. Today, I'm not going back in a time machine. We are today, 2019. If you had to make decisions today, looking at today's threat landscape and today's situation, geopolitical issues, what would be your number one recommendation, number one priority for a global security program for an organization? One thing that they can do, looking at today.
One thing?
Well, the top one. Of course, there's many things to do, but the top one.
To me, it's preparedness. You can't prepare enough. And you don't think about working in the dark, pre-internet. You're not connected anymore. How are you going to run your business? Get the right people at the table. Make the tough decisions next week, not when you're under attack. That doesn't work. We didn't know this. We know it now. So I think for me, that's the most important thing. Get everyone on the same page, define roles and responsibilities, and when it happens, go for it. And don't be afraid to call in the right people to help you.
Or the Ghostbusters.
Better, well, not better.
Well, maybe we need a cyber Ghostbusters. That could be
Maybe.
a really cool new company if somebody wants to join me. All right, please join me in thanking Stevan Bernard for his wisdom and experience and expertise. Thank you. Thank you. After you. I'm Keren Elazari, and I'll see you next year at Cyber Week Tel Aviv. Bye-bye.